Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. Today I have a book review for you for a Star Wars Legends or EU book, and that is for Truce at Bakura. So Truce at Bakura was written by Tyers. This is one of the earliest EU books, because the EU kind of got started like in 1993-ish, I believe. And according to the back of this book, it's copyright 94, so this must have been released in 1994. I don't know actually for sure, but I assume that is the case. And I think this is actually like an original paperback because according to the inside of this book, it says the new book in hardcover is The Crystal Star, which was also a early mid-90s book. So it's kind of cool to have an older copy of this one, but this was a very early EU book, and it's also one that explores a period pretty early on in the EU in terms of what was kind of started to be explored, because the early EU, like for the first, I don't know, quite a good while up until The Phantom Menace was coming out, pretty much was all post-Return of the Jedi, or at least original trilogy era. And this actually directly follows up Return of the Jedi. The very beginning of this book is literally like right after the Ewok celebration scene in Return of the Jedi. So this like is a direct follow-up. And this book is basically about an invading force called the Searook, which is basically Star Wars dinosaurs, which is kind of awesome, to be honest. And they're basically trying to invade this planet of Bakura, or something, or trying to kind of essentially take over and, you know, invade the galaxy or whatever. And that's basically the premise of this book. And the Empire and the Rebellion have to kind of work together to repel the Searook because they want to do some super not fun stuff. So that's kind of the premise of this book. Now, as far as positives, I actually have quite a few, because I think this book has a lot of really great individual bits. I'm not going to talk about this really right now because I'm going to talk about it more in negatives, but this book as a whole was not fantastic in my opinion, but there were a lot of individual parts that I really, really liked. First of all, the original trilogy characters that this centers on, you know, Han, Luke, Leia, the droids, Chewbacca, they're all in this book. And they are all done very well. They all feel like they should. They all have interesting dialogue, back and forth, interesting interactions. They're a lot of fun to hang out with, and I think they were done really well. I also think that the new villains, the Searook, are interesting. I think they probably could have been expanded on a little bit more, because I didn't love them, but I guess I'll talk about that also when I get to negatives. But it's an interesting concept for a race of alien villains, considering that what they are actually trying to do, and the fact that they're space dinosaurs, which, again, I just love. I love Star Wars when it's weird and silly, and space dinosaurs is very weird and silly. Another thing I really liked about this book were the particular storylines for the characters of Luke and Leia, individually, although they do overlap, certainly, you know, they interact with each other and stuff, but the kind of individual parts for those two characters I really liked. I'll start with Leia. She is trying to be kind of more diplomatic, trying to kind of talk to the Empire and be like, we want to help you repel this invasion or whatever, but we need you to work with us, and we're trying to, you know, do the right thing. And her interactions with the Imperial characters was really interesting. And also in this book, of course, at the time of the events of this book, she has just found out not that long ago that Darth Vader was her father. And she is trying to kind of deal with that in this book. There's several moments where she's kind of reflecting on it and being like, you know, Luke may have forgiven Anakin for what he did because he was redeemed in his last moments, but I don't forgive him. I don't want to be associated with him. It's very interesting to see the two of them and their very different reactions to Vader being their father. And I really hope that is expanded more in other books, because at this moment I have not read, all of the EU post Return of the Jedi. So I hope that that is expanded on more. If it is, and if you've read some of those books, let me know. But I hope that we see some more of that. I think there may have been some of that in the Thrawn trilogy, but to be honest, I don't remember much about the Thrawn trilogy. But I loved that aspect of it. And then also with Luke, Luke's parts in this book were some of the most interesting kind of dialogues, I guess, in any Star Wars book that I've read, because he meets this character. The character is Gariel. There we go. So she's a character in this book from Bakura, and she is introduced pretty early on, and kind of the big thing with her character is that she is essentially religiously opposed to the Force. So including the Jedi, including the Sith, she just does not agree with the Force being a thing. It kind of reminds me of the more recent book from the High Republic, Path of Deceit, with the Path of the Open Hand, I believe they're called. And that's the only book I've read of Phase 2, so I don't know if this is expanded on more in the other books, but something that really stuck out to me in that book was that those characters who were a part of that kind of Force cult, they believed that if a Jedi or a Sith or whoever used the Force, it would in some way detract from somebody else in the galaxy, because, the Force needs to be balanced, and if, somebody uses the Force for something for their own gain, essentially, in any way, whether it's to do something good or bad, and they use it to do something, it is then taking away from somebody else, and making kind of an imbalance in the galaxy in that way. And that's kind of very similar to what Gariel believes in this book. She is just opposed to the Force because she thinks that if you use the Force, that's going to have negative consequences elsewhere in the galaxy. And she and Luke discuss that quite a bit in this book, and those were my favorite sections of this book, because the Force in general is just a very interesting concept within Star Wars, and looking at it through this lens is also very interesting, and I really enjoyed that. But anyways, moving out of positives and now into negatives, kind of to talk a little bit more about some of the points I talked about in positives. The Sea Rook as villains, as I said, interesting concept. Space dinosaurs are cool, but I didn't really feel the threat in them. I don't know if it was not super well written or explained what their motivations were or what they did, or if it was just because, there are books after this one, so there's not a whole lot of tension in terms of, oh, these guys want to take over the galaxy, because they're not going to. Spoiler alert. Or I don't know what it was, but they just, to me, were not very threatening. They were not really, I didn't feel much for them compared to other villains within Legends, like the Yuuzhan Vong, which I actually really like in the New Jedi Order from what I've read of it so far. They feel more threatening to me and more interesting than the Sea Rook. Other villains, Thrawn in the Thrawn trilogy and all the people around him, and so on and so forth. The Sea Rook just didn't really do much for me. I also, it doesn't bother me that much, but I think that setting this directly after Return of the Jedi feels really off to me. I guess I just don't like the idea of, having Return of the Jedi, yay, we defeated the Empire, but then immediately afterwards, this thing that could potentially be very bad for the entire galaxy all over again just happens right after Return of the Jedi. And again, there are certain things about this being set up after Return of the Jedi that I really like how the Republic, or not the Republic, the rebels have to try to work with the Empire and be like, yeah, we kind of killed your Emperor, he's kind of dead, but work with us, please. And all that stuff, and Leia going over Anakin being her father, and all that stuff. There's interesting stuff to do with that for sure, but in general, it just felt really weird for this to be set so soon after Return of the Jedi to me. And in general, the thing that really just brings this one down a little bit for me, not bad by any means, but the thing that brings it down a bit for me is that it just overall didn't leave a huge impression on me in terms of like the plot or anything. Like I said, certain parts of the characters and their interactions I really liked, but in general, it just didn't leave a huge impression on me. I didn't love it. This one, to me, it's kind of like the saying of like, it's greater than the sum of its parts. This to me is kind of the opposite of that. I don't know if that would be the lesser of than the sum of its parts, or I don't know what kind of expression you use for that. But it's like I loved the individual bits of this book, but the book itself, So I don't know how you would really explain that, but that's basically how I felt about it. But anyways, overall, this was a pretty decent book. Like I said, there was definitely a lot of stuff that I enjoyed in this one. But in general, it was just a very okay book to me. Didn't love it, didn't really dislike it at all. You know, there was definitely plenty of positive stuff, but for some reason it just didn't, in general, grab me that much. And I think a good part of that was probably the Sirook. I just didn't care about that conflict or them being the villains or whatever. I was just more interested in, you know, Luke and Gariel and their interactions and their relationship and the stuff going on with Leia and all that stuff. Whereas the events surrounding that, that were kind of causing all of these things to happen, just didn't really resonate with me, didn't really grab me. So it's kind of weird. I kind of struggle to really say for sure what I think of this one, but that's pretty much the closest I can get to it. As far as a rating, I think I would give this one like a 7 out of 10, because again, plenty of good stuff here. But again, as a whole, it just didn't really grab me a huge amount. I think that kind of balances out. You know, to me, a 7 is, you know, a good book that I enjoyed. I wouldn't necessarily love to read it again, but, you know, it had some good stuff in it. And this certainly did, but it wasn't quite like on the level of great or anything for me. Anyways, that's pretty much it for this review. So let me know down in the comments if you have read The Truce at Bakura and what you thought of it. That's pretty much it for today. So thank you for watching, and I will see you guys next time.